Hello there. You are here. Hello, let's try that again. Oh, there I am in my ears. It's been a while since I've been on the radio, relearning. So, hello there. You are here with State of the Union with DG the 30-something. I'm actually doing State of Sonoma County today. We're going to be talking about housing, cannabis, and recovery, disaster recovery. So, we're going to get ready for that. I have a couple things to say before. So please, we are having a fundraiser for the radio at Lagunitas on May 20th. It starts at 5:30. So if you can, please attend. Please do. We rely on the support. So if you're on Facebook, you can see we have a really cool flyer. So please do attend. It's $20 in advance and $25 at the door. You can buy tickets at petalumacommunityaccess.org under the events tab on the top. So again, we rely on funding from the community. We are community access. We are community run. Everyone here that has a show is a volunteer. And we all work very hard. I know I do. I work very hard. I do a lot of preparation for my show. So, show some love, show up. I'll be there. My birthday's on Sunday, and this is on Monday, the 20th. So, come by, say happy birthday. I'd like it. Let's celebrate together. Lagunitas is a great support. They actually hosted our retreat this year, and they're hosting us for a fundraiser. So, like I said, please come by. Again, you can buy your tickets. So, Lagunitas, 5:30, May 20th, $20 in advance, $25 at the door. You can buy your tickets at petalumacommunityaccess.org under events. You can also check out our brand new website that just got released. I guess it's been a couple weeks now, but if you haven't seen it, please do learn information about the organization, about the radio station, all that cool stuff. So, like I said, today I have a lot of content, so we'll see what we get through. I am going to be doing a State of Sonoma County show today. I am going to be focusing on, like I said, housing, recovery, disaster recovery, and I actually have a different kind of viewpoint, so I really want to get to that, and then cannabis. But, I'm going to be completely honest, not a lot has changed with cannabis. It's a long, difficult process. Anyway, but we'll get to that. There is some new state regulation. So, let's talk about housing. So, I've talked about housing before. I know several shows ago I shared data and did that whole thing, but I know people don't memorize data like I do. I'm a data junkie, so I just have it stuck in my brain. So I'm going to share some data about the cause for the housing crisis. My last show, if you didn't see it, you can just scroll down on my page or go into videos. If you're on Facebook, I promise for my radio listeners, I'll get better at putting them on my website. So you can check back at domenica.ninja. So that's DOMENICA.ninja. And you can see my past shows as well. So like I said, I'm going to get better putting them on there, but give me a couple weeks. So my last show, which was a while ago, I was unfortunately sick. My last time slot, I'm every other Tuesday at 7 p.m. So I was unfortunately sick during my last time slot, so it's been a while. My last show was on the stigma around affordable housing and why it is so difficult to accomplish building affordable housing. So today I'm actually going to talk about kind of the brass tacks of why we're in the situation we're in. And that's why I want to go from housing to recovery. I had a hard time. Should I do recovery? Should I do housing? But I'm going to do housing first because I'm going to feed you with a bunch of data. So in Sonoma County, this is census data. And if it's not census data, then I will distinguish for you because it's really important to me that people know the sources of what I'm talking about. And so the median household income in Sonoma County is $71,769. And that's an estimate from 2017. They do this American survey that they do, and they try to update it. But the major census is coming, so please fill out your census information because it helps us get all this stuff. So the population is 504,000. We are a relatively small county. So now we're getting into the housing stuff. So 55.9% of housing is owner-occupied. In the state, in Sonoma County, 60.49% is owner-occupied. In the state, 44.1% of housing is renter occupied, and in Sonoma County, it's 39.69. So we have slightly higher not slightly, I mean, it's almost 5%. So we have higher home ownership, owner occupied housing than renter housing, which is part of our problem. So currently 90.8% of housing is occupied. Now, this is probably a little different after the fires. This may not be super current. 2017 was kind of, you don't know where this data was coming from. So, so we already did the owner occupied. So the median house amount in the entire county is $530,000. So if you live in Petaluma, you see a lot of $1 million houses, but in other areas, it's about $513,000 is the median value of a house. So cost, the gross rent is $1,456 a month. So yeah. So currently I wanted to point this out. So under the fire recovery category, over 900 permits have been issued for rebuild. We lost 3,500 structures, so that is something, but not everyone decided to rebuild as well. So that's also a consideration. Some people sold their property. And so getting into some poverty information, which I think is always a good thing to include in housing information. So the poverty rate here is 11.3%. It is significantly lower than the state, which is 17%. This is from the Sonoma County Economic Development Board, those two statistics. And the poverty rate for 4 people, so the poverty rates are not established by the state. They're established by the federal government. So these are numbers that are established by the federal government, and this is how services are allocated. Public services are allocated based on the federal poverty level. So the federal poverty level for 4 people is $25,750 a year. And shockingly, the poverty level has been going down for quite some time. I just didn't think, I think for an individual, it's less than $14,000 a year. I think it's around $13,000 a year. So Sonoma County got a low grade on housing affordability. Not shocking. If you live here, then it's not shocking that we got a low grade on housing affordability. So 3/4 of households cannot afford a house at the median rate. So the average mortgage is $3,500 a month. And so most, 75% of the county can't afford that mortgage. And this data is from the California Association of Realtors, some research they did. So you would have to make, based on averages in Sonoma County, you would have to make $138,760 a year to afford the median household. So, and this one actually it's different than the census. And so this one's more current, so I probably should use that data, but this is actually saying the median household price is $640,000 a year. So that's what the percentage is. The last estimate in 2017 was 513, but I would kind of trust this newer data after the fires at 640,000 because things obviously went crazy. And one of the biggest reasons that we need affordable housing, and again, that's like a bad word with most people, or they don't want it in their backyard. They want affordable housing. They realize it's necessary, but not around me. So, it's a big deal to allow people to work and live in Sonoma County because they pay local taxes, support local business, and there's a decrease in commute, which in theory is better for the environment because, they're not driving in their cars. And, it's time. It's time to set some reasonable objectives. So homelessness, before we get into kind of the takeaways, homelessness, there's almost 3,000 people without permanent housing in Sonoma County, which I would venture to guess is not as high as other areas in the Bay Area, but it is still a significant number of people, 3,000 people without permanent housing. So affordable housing is defined as paying less than 30% of your gross income, which I still think that paying 30% of your gross income is a very intense amount of money to be expected to pay for housing, but that is the expectation. So again, affordable housing is less than 30% of your total income. So there's basically, let's see, what is it? We need 21,000 rental homes for low-income renters and fire survivors. So that's kind of the estimate of the housing need in the county. Now, I think that the Board of Supervisors have an objective of building 30,000 homes in the next, I can't remember if it's 10 years or 20 years, but they have this objective to build 30,000 homes. Now, where those are going to go with everything that I talked about in my last show, with all the stigma around affordable housing and even using the word affordable housing, and what that looks like, is it presents a huge challenge to where the housing is actually going to go, and we need high density development, which is, again, that's another bad word. But it's the only way to make housing affordable is to have high density development. If we just keep building a bunch of single family homes, I mean, that's something, it's definitely progress, but it is not necessarily going to really accomplish that goal that we're looking for. So I talked about commuting. So 36.9% of Sonoma County residents commute. So, and this is from the county economic and demographic profile. So close to 37% of people are commuting out of the county, which means that they can't afford to live and work in the county. And so I actually have some other data that is really compelling. I think this is also from the Sonoma County Economic Development Board. But so real wages in Sonoma County since 2011, so wages for people since 2011, have only increased 6%. However, rents are up 32% and home prices are up 58%. So people are only making 6% more, which it's less than even, I think it's 3% a year is a cost of living raise for an employee. So we're talking about 6% since 2011. That's kind of crazy. And so like I said, rents are up 32%, home prices are up 58%. So you can see that people are not able to pay 30% of their wage in order to accommodate for the major increase in housing costs. So 40.6% to this point, 40.6% pay more than 30% of their income towards housing in Sonoma County. So the sample size for this is always important. It came after, but the sample size is about 1,181. Hopefully it was a representative sample of the county, but I think that it's something to work with. So almost 30% of the respondents plan on moving out of the county in the next 5 years. 47% would like to live next to public transportation, which is also an ongoing battle. So 53% are willing to live in an accessory dwelling unit. So an accessory dwelling unit is what we commonly know as a granny unit. There's restrictions in what accessory dwelling unit can be, and the square footage, and it has to be a kitchen, and it can't be a vacation rental. So there's this whole slew of stuff for the county, and then each city also has their own rules around it. I'm most familiar with the county because I'm up at the county permit department right now, if you want to know more about ADUs. So this is a really interesting statistic to me, is that 42% of people want higher density housing, which is interesting because, again, I talked all about the kind of stigma and the issues that people have about developing affordable housing, and yet we have the situation where 42%, it's not the majority, but that's a significant amount of people that I would like to see come out of their houses and talk about, doing some higher density building. But that's going, that's an uphill battle. So really, the take home, the 3 take homes that I have from, and this is data I pulled a while ago. It's just something I pulled for work. And so why create the wheel? I already had all the data. So the main takeaways is that we want people to live and work in Sonoma County. We want to decrease homelessness, and we want to decrease displacement. So with that many people wanting to leave the county in 5 years, that's it's not only sad, but it can cause a whole slew of issues for the county. Our workforce isn't here. You see the articles constantly about how businesses in Sonoma County can't retain or find employees, and that's because they're not making anything. They're only making 6% more, and it's a trickle down. So it's not always that the company just doesn't want to pay their employees. It's that they're paying higher rents than they were in 2011, like significantly higher rents. The real estate is way more expensive. This isn't the place where now, some companies are. Most companies are leaving California in general, like the big ones. But this used to be a hidden gem where people could come and the real estate was cheap and, it was easy to rent a commercial facility. And now that's just not the case. It's not the case for homes. It's not the case for business. My parents moved here from San Francisco 25 years ago. And owning a house was, it's owning a house in suburbia. It was a huge step up for them. They bought their first house, but now it's a pipe dream for people in my generation and older generations because the housing costs have gotten so high that we want to leave. You can live in cities and other parts of the country for less money than living in suburbia. So housing is a huge issue, and I know that it's thrown around all the time. The words affordable housing is thrown around all the time, but I do think that there needs to be strategic steps and cohesive steps where, they're reasonable goals. And I think that addressing, again, I did this whole show on kind of the messaging that has to go around housing in order to successfully build affordable housing in general. And so, like I said, refer to that, but it's this whole sense of community that is how we build more housing. It's not, unfortunately, I've said it many times on my show, but as a country, we live in a very individualistic, this doesn't affect me, I'm doing this, and so therefore, it's not my problem. So why would I, advocate for affordable housing when I'm in a house, I'm fine, I'm good, but clearly we have a problem. So kind of breaking that cycle of people realizing that you want a holistic and effective community. That's what builds. It's one of the social determinants of health that I talk about all the time too, is people are healthy when they have a sense of community and unity. And, that's necessary in order to accomplish these goals. And, of course, there's bureaucracy in everything, but really at that core cultural level is where the shift has to be. Is it going to be easy? No, of course it's not going to be easy. This is a nationwide issue we're having. We saw it in the last election, regardless of who you supported, we saw this complete separation of beliefs. Like a very significant gap was created by both poles. So we've been very polarized. And, and all the topics I'm going to talk about today, they're very hard to address when you have that polarization. Now, I will say, especially what we saw in the recovery efforts, which I'll get to next, is that Sonoma County definitely has a more cohesive community than many other places in the state and the country. But there's still work to be done in these specific areas. So, of course, the disaster happens, fire, flood, and people do come together and support each other and do all that kind of stuff, but we also need to realize that that's incredibly important. And again, I'll get into this in the next, when I talk about disaster recovery, but what we perhaps are not seeing is that people need help not only in times of emergency. They need consistent support throughout their lives. And we need a solution. I mean, we know that we need affordable housing. People don't like to use the words affordable housing because it's so charged. And so how do we find this middle ground of we need affordable housing, but no one wants to accommodate affordable housing? So of course, I always say, regardless of where you stand, please advocate for what you're looking for. But again, I think this is a well-known thing, and some of us are going to have to accept that it's going to be near us. You know, that's part of what's going on here. Like, we need to develop housing somewhere, so we need to be able to identify where it's going to go and then build in those areas. Otherwise, people are going to leave. And do we really want that? I know there's plenty of people that say, well, if you can't afford to live here, leave. That was one of the bullet points in my last show, is that people basically have this idea that if you can't afford to live here, you should just leave. But again, that's a very individualistic viewpoint, because we have such a rich culture in Sonoma County with this community and all this kind of stuff. Our diversity is increasing. So we don't want people, I don't want people to leave. I want people to be able to stay in this county. I want to be able to stay in this county. And, you know, it's difficult for me. It's difficult for my generation. It's going to be incredibly difficult for the younger generations that really want to stay in their home community or really want to come here because they love the community, and they're not going to be able to stay. I mean, that's, what was it, 25% plan on leaving? 29% plan on leaving in the next 5 years. So, again, that's some considerations, and that's a perfect transition into my next topic. So, I looked at this really cool research from Dr. Aldridge. Of course, I didn't write down his first name. You know, you get into a mode and then you don't write down their first name. But I'm sure if you put in Dr. Aldridge, you know, disaster recovery, I'm sure you'll find him. But he talks about how there's certain assumptions of why recovery happens and why actually recovery is effective. So fire recovery is happening. Like I said, we are developing, we're watching houses pop up, we're watching businesses pop up. No one thought it was going to be a fast process. So it is taking its course and its time. And like I said, it's each city, each county has their own role. Well, one county, we're in Sonoma County, but you know, everyone has their processes that you have to go through. And I think that there's really been, what I've seen is that there has been a large amount of accommodation to expedite the process so that people can rebuild fast. But it also, you know, we also ran into the fact that some people couldn't rebuild. They had to leave the area. A big thing was a lot of renters that didn't have insurance and really had, you know, didn't have anywhere to go. Those were huge. When I was working, I worked in a shelter. As soon as I woke up and figured out the fires were happening, I went to a shelter to volunteer. And one of the largest populations were minority populations, poor populations, and renters, because they had nowhere to go. I mean, people in certain areas of Santa Rosa had somewhere to go in order to escape the fire. And again, I'm not trying to say that one person is worse off than the other. It's just an observation of who was utilizing the shelters and who wasn't. And I kept saying during the recovery effort is the population that is going to have the hardest time is that population that was renters. They have they didn't have insurance, which doesn't necessarily cover a whole lot, and have nowhere to go. And so that was a huge gaping hole in the recovery efforts. And we have been accommodating people living in trailers and all these kind of things. I think those programs are ending now. And I'm sure it's for budget reasons. Of course, it's someone has to pay to accommodate those temporary living situations. So a lot of those programs are ending now. And so again, these renters are being displaced. So the recovery effort is still happening. I think that we're doing our best as a county to respond. We had the floods, and the response was immediate. There's an immediate response. The fires, of course, were I think there was kind of that shocking response because it just went so far so fast. So, that is a consideration too. But anyway, so we're moving fast as recovery. Like I said, I'm going to talk about his kind of theories about social capital for recovery. And I chose to do the recovery kind of news under this category because I think Sonoma County is actually really strong on this. But I also want to kind of point out some of the assumptions that are made. And maybe it's really statewide, but I think Sonoma County actually has done a better job at realizing that social capital is key to recovery. That being said, of course, you can always do more work and, help people. So there are major assumptions, and it's not to say that these aren't contributing factors to recovery, because they are, but the assumptions are that it's due to money. So how much money the city, county has in order to address the disaster, the governance. So, kind of the who's in charge, the efficiency of bureaucracy, if that's, I feel like that's a misnomer. But so governance over, and I mean, maybe I think it's like having a cohesive governance so that you can make decisions as fast as possible during a disaster situation. And then the level of damage. And of course, again, that definitely does contribute to the recovery time and effort. The population density. So, and he was talking about in his research the international view. So there's a lot of examples of obviously much higher density places than Sonoma County. And so the population density is discussed as one of the major assumptions of the only causes of disaster, of the effectiveness of disaster recovery. And then inequality. Now, I will always say that inequality is a major factor in how disasters affect people. Of course, that's just, I shouldn't say it's intuitive, because it's not intuitive to a lot of people, but it is intuitive, and we saw that in a lot of the outcomes of the disaster recovery of what populations were the most affected. So like I said, I was just talking about renters, the poorer populations, the people that couldn't rebuild their houses, they had to leave, and, not even be able to find a contractor, which was a huge issue, which leads to a whole other point where, I'm going to go on a tangent, but I'm just going to go on this tangent because I feel like I have to. So there was a huge shortage in contractors, and then the people that work for the contractors. And one of the major theories is that kids are being pushed into college now, which they have been for a long time. That was the assumption for me. My parents would have accepted whatever I did, but my whole life was about going to college. That was my goal. And so because we are very academically focused, we are missing now the trade professions. And construction workers make a lot of money, but there aren't enough people out there that are willing to do it. And so we have this huge shortage, and that was really brought to life during the recovery effort because there was just no one to do the work. There was no one willing to do the work. And, sometimes unionize, you got to go through this process. So I'm not saying all that kind of stuff, but that was a huge issue, was being able to find a contractor. And I think that's still an issue. I think that's why people are still having a hard time rebuilding, because they can't find someone to do it. And that's usually who helps you through the permit process. That's who helps you through that entire process, is the contractor or the engineer. Those people that know how to navigate the process. And most people, you need that help. Like, you can't, navigating the process it's a process. So Dr. Aldridge talks about different types of bonds that you have with people. So there are bonding social ties, is the word he used, which are people that are like you. So same language, same ethnicity, that background stuff. So those are considered people that are like you. And then there are bridging ties, which are people that might have different backgrounds, but you know them through school or church. So maybe the difference is you have more personal relationships with your bonding social ties, and then you're more acquaintances of your bridging ties. And then there are vertical ties, which are connections to people of power. So that could be knowing your mayor, or, again, knowing a political official, having some sort of, clout, I guess, in that situation. Because, of course, if you're going to utilize a vertical tie, then you'd have to have some more personal relationship with the people in power. I hate to say that, people in power, but, they are the people in power. So having those relationships, and I think a huge part of the vertical ties, which I'll get to that point, but it's not only knowing the people, but it is knowing how to navigate the process in order to actually communicate with those people, reach them, call them up, ask for help, learning how to navigate the process, or knowing how to navigate the process, really. So one of the major issues during disasters is the question of, do you go back? So, and it's a question of, can you go back? Do you go back? Who's going back? So in the case of the fires, it's how many people could really go back to their homes, and what influenced people going back to their homes. So there are certain costs that are associated with going back. And again, we're talking about social capital, so there are, there's a myriad of different costs. So there is the financial and emotional cost. So even just like looking through this research I had, and I wasn't in Santa Rosa, I wasn't evacuated. Obviously, I knew a bunch of people that were, I knew people that lost their houses, all that kind of stuff. But I even started to have like a PTSD response, because I'm just thinking, through reading this research, I'm thinking of all my friends that had to evacuate, my family that had to evacuate, and those people whose houses burnt down, and what are they doing now, and, where are they living now? So all those questions that happen, and that's the financial and emotional cost. The emotional cost is, can you go back? Is it going to be too traumatizing to go back? Or can you go back? And then the other thing is opportunity cost. So one of the examples he used was a major disaster in, I can't remember the country now, but there was a major earthquake, I believe, and basically things crumbled in the cities. And so the main question is there a reason to go back if all the infrastructure is gone, the business is gone, none of that is in existence anymore. So, and the other thing is, can you get a job? Can you restart your business? Can you really develop your family? And in some disasters, the schools don't reopen. Like Fukushima, I think, was one of the examples. And, the schools couldn't reopen for months. And, people really didn't go back. But that's part of the reason why is there really a reason for me to go back? Like, can I actually live where my home was now if this disaster happened? So it might be cleaned up, but can I go back? I mean, is there an opportunity back at my house? That's what opportunity cost is there an opportunity to succeed back where I lived? So this is kind of getting into the point of all this research that was done, is those that had more ties to people go back. And the two major reasons why is because if you have those really strong social ties, and again, if it's bonding social ties, so people that you're more close to, if it's bridging ties where it's acquaintances, or vertical ties, so you know someone in power, those are the people that go back. So the more ties you have, the more people that go back. And the reason is that there's collective action. So people are able to work together to address the issue, to clean up, and that's something that again, I'm going through this particular research because I think Sonoma County was very strong in this arena, is that people came together. We all saw it. So let me say, it's collective action and mutual aid. So, because what I'm going to talk about is a lot of mutual aid. So the mutual aid is, hey, can you knock on the door of your neighbor and say, I need an egg, right? That's always or I need a cup of sugar. That was always one of the stories that people told. Like, back in the day, I could knock on my neighbor's door and get a cup of sugar. And the problem is people don't know their neighbors anymore. I don't know my neighbors. I know a couple of them, but how many of your neighbors do you know by first name? And so that's one of the major issues. But what we saw in Sonoma County was that everyone did very quickly come together as fast as possible. I mean, this with the fires, again, it was just so sudden, and it was overnight, literally, and people just didn't have any warning. And so, but it was that idea that to as much as possible, people were knocking on their neighbors' doors and saying, get out, you got to get out. And that's part of where the messaging can't even get out. I mean, after the initial night, then emergency services were able to get messaging out. But before that, it was just like, oh my God, everyone was in a scramble. But we still had that. We still had people knocking on doors. And so, and then the level of support in shelters and the donations, but please, I always say, please watch your donation levels, because a lot of that stuff does not get used. So someday my idea will come true, and we'll have a mobile app to manage all this. And I'm not going to give away all my secrets, but I already talked to someone at FEMA about it, because I think it should be government run. I don't think it should be Red Cross, which is my personal opinion. So watch that. Just please watch that, because one of the things that we had in Sonoma County is people were so generous that I think there was a photo outside the community center where they just had the entire sidewalk in Petaluma, the Petaluma Community Center. It was just filled with stuff that was donated, and they're basically saying, like, free stuff, and really it gets donated to other countries. Is that terrible? No, but at the same time, we need to watch that. So mutual aid is good, but strategic mutual aid is better. And so those individuals, communities, this is really the vertical ties. I feel they are important as an individual, but I think they're more important as a community. So the more vertical ties you have, the best chances for recovery. So something I found really interesting, this is kind of a side note with the bonding ties and relationships, but that the mental health status was something that affect resilience significantly. So the assumption is that it would be physical health, and again, it's not to say that these things don't affect resilience and recovery, because of course they do, but there was more correlation with mental health status than physical status, physical health, or money. And mental health status was greatly impacted, like I've been talking about, is these social ties and relationships. That is what indicated the best success. So if you don't have these social connections, and you don't have the mutual aid, and you don't have the collective, that feeling of collective action where you're part of a community, your mental health status is going to decline. And again, it's that whole PTSD response. Can I do this? Can I go back? Can I handle it? And you need that social tie in order to kind of bring it full circle and say, okay, it's going to be okay. And again, that's something that Sonoma County did really well. So what do we do now? Again, so Sonoma County did really well on that, but I also think that I started with housing because it wasn't a natural disaster that occurred. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't a wildfire. It wasn't a flood. We should prepare for all those things. But what it is a crisis. And so some of these things that, some of the takeaways with what we do now is also addressing these other issues in the county. So the housing situation is a crisis. And so these kind of takeaways from how we do recovery from a disaster or a crisis is the same. So be a good neighbor. it's like I was talking about, you know, how many of your neighbors do you have? And I've seen 2 presentations now where they talk about these block parties that certain organizations, I can't remember for the life of me, but if you get in contact with me, I can tell you because I have the information. But there's an organization that actually sponsors block parties, which actually used to occur in communities. It used to be block parties. But the idea is getting people together. I mean, it's a block party. I think people know what a block party is, right? You're getting people together. You're knowing your neighbors. Both of them that were talked about encourage emergency preparedness planning, and which is important because you need your neighbors. Like I said, in recovery and resilience, you need your neighbors. So be a good neighbor, and all it takes is. And the example was, you're still going to go to a block party. It might even be the neighbor you hate, but you got to go to the block party with them. So, because in a time of crisis, you're not going to hate that person anymore. You're going to need each other. That's just the bottom line, because we all need each other in times of crisis or disaster. So, be a good neighbor. Get involved. Get involved in some way in your community. Some sort of volunteerism, because then you have that kind of connection to the community. And I talk a lot about public service and volunteerism, and so no one can do everything. It's about finding what your niche is, and mine's government. Mine's like being really involved in government, policy development, advocacy. So that's my deal. But get involved in something that is a part of your community, because that'll connect you better to your community. It'll help other people connect to you better in the community. And really, it's great to volunteer for national organizations, but I really encourage people to get involved in their local organizations. I mean, again, Sonoma County is I think the nonprofit, the last report I saw is that the nonprofit sector is $1 billion industry in Sonoma County. You have plenty of choices of where to volunteer. So find your passion, find your thing. Again, I was saying after the election that people got so scrambled in either direction, like, oh my God, I have to address this issue, and they're trying to do a million different things. And it's like, no, find your one thing. That's how you're going to impact people best. Find what you're doing. That's why I have my radio show, because I do governmental advocacy. These are things I care about. So I did my show because that's what I care about. I want to share the information I know. I want to be able to share the analysis of the information I know. So, find your thing. This is one of my things I do. I spend a lot of time in Sacramento. And even now I'm doing a lot more federal advocacy than I did before. So it goes at all levels. And of course I'm involved in the city. So be involved. And so something that was pointed out in the research, which, people are always hit or miss about, but are the digital relationships that we have. Now, I've written a whole blog about it. I think it's called Why Everyone Should Treat Their Personal Facebook Page like a Business Facebook Page. It's on my website. Again, dominica.ninja. And the reason that's important, because we curate business Facebook pages way more strategically than personal pages. And where you run into problems with that is that you end up having all this banter and all this fighting, and people don't want to be on Facebook anymore because it's all dog pictures and people fighting over political issues. But digital relationships and use of social media is powerful. It is so powerful. And that was the intention. And that's how we need to use it. It is so powerful to reach people. And we saw it during the disasters. It was such a powerful tool to reach people during the disasters. And so we need to remember that year round. Again, like I said, we're having a housing crisis. We're having other crises. Remember that, because that's part of the resilience and recovery, is recovering from these crises that we're having. And so, I'm going to go to cannabis because I'm going to run out of time, but I could talk about this all day. I could talk about housing and recovery, but I hope that you appreciated that research as much as I did. And again, to some extent, I think it's intuitive, but it's not, because we had to establish the social determinants of health to establish that a community is something that affects your health and your overall health. We're talking about holistic health, not just your physical health, not even just your mental health, but your overall health is impacted by the community that you've created. And so that's really important. And your community might not be very big. I mean, my community is huge, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be huge. So cannabis, I'm going like completely somewhere else, but I think that this is an issue all over the state of California right now. So it's not just isolated to Sonoma County, but it's something that people are really interested in. And the state laws were changing to affect 100% hemp production. So each county was charged with, well, each jurisdiction was charged with passing their own laws. And, you know, it's been this really interesting process the state has gone through in order to address this issue of, okay, this law was passed and now we have to license all these cannabis companies, but we literally don't have the staff to do it. So that's what's happened. And I think this is, I think it's common knowledge if you follow cannabis at all, which in Sonoma County it's kind of hard not to, it's all over the news, is that it is very well known that often, and I've said it before, I'm going to try to say it as nicely as possible, but it's very well known that policy is passed before implementation is considered. So I've done lectures on policy development, and I always say plan the implementation of the policy first. So how is this policy going to be implemented, and then we can pass the policy, because what the state of California did, and it was a vote, so maybe they just weren't ready for it because it was a public vote, but what happened is that this policy was passed and they didn't have the capacity to actually implement that policy. Happens all the time, especially at the federal level. I think the federal level is the biggest culprit of this, where they pass all these policies without understanding what it's like to be on the ground. And so, you know, they don't go and talk to a social worker in a clinic to address a policy that's going to be developed that's going to directly affect that person's job. I mean, they just don't do it, you know? And so I think that that's something really important to consider, you know? So right now there is a Senate bill in the process. So Senate Bill 67. And so it's developed to try to bridge the licensing gap that happened, because what's happening is that people had these temporary licenses during the process of going through the process. And so in short, I'm looking at the wrong clock and it's got the wrong time on it. So in short, they're trying to pass this state bill that will kind of bridge that gap and will revalidate the licenses that are currently in limbo because the state can't address them. So that's in the works. I hope it passes, because it's a very difficult situation, I think, for everyone involved. So, and you can't blame anyone. It's no one's fault. It's just, it got legalized, and from there, it's been experimental. So we're all learning as we go in this process, just like with most policies. And I mean, this was something brand new. This wasn't like something that there was any indication. I mean, we had Colorado, we had some other places that could have learned, but California is a huge state and it's a huge cannabis state. So it's just been a learning process. And so I hope they pass it, just because I think that any business should have the opportunity to go through the process. And a lot of the businesses are going through the process. You know, they're doing their best to go through the process legally, and I don't think that within the best of our ability that they should be penalized. Now, of course, there's a whole other slew of considerations that happen, and there are, you know, enforcement that does have to happen. I'm not saying that. I think that that's important. I see both sides. But I also think, you know, this could be a good thing. Maybe it would be a terrible thing. I don't know, but it's a possibility. So the county has a penalty relief program. I just wanted to point that out because it's something that I didn't know until recently. So they have a lot of agencies that were given permits under penalty relief, which is a really cool thing because, again, it gave cannabis companies the opportunity to go through the process. So also, if you're looking to get more information locally, there is a County of Sonoma Cannabis Advisory Committee. And again, so each jurisdiction has their own rules. So when I talk about the county, I'm talking about the unincorporated. So that's what I know best right now. So the dispensaries in county are limited to 9. And there is a waiting list. I believe there's a waiting list that was just created. And of course, permits are required where necessary. So one of the biggest criticisms is, or it's not a criticism, but well, it is for some people, but one of the major issues that's happening right now is that this kind of regulation that was passed is leading companies to do two things. And these are kind of predictions, but it's probably happening. I mean, predictions kind of happen for a reason. So that a lot of companies are going to the black market. They are closing, which you'll hear a lot of cannabis advocates say that a lot of companies are closing because they just can't afford the process. And then a lot of companies are leaving. So actually, Sonoma Clean Power had this article, maybe last month, I think is last month, time flies, where they were talking about how they lost so much business. And again, this is kind of not a scientific correlation, it's more of like a predictive correlation, but they're basically saying that they had a huge decrease in energy usage, and again, they have scale, so they can scale it based on what would be normal for a home versus what would be normal for a commercial building, and kind of some predictions about what would be normal for a cannabis operation, an indoor cannabis operation. Also, though, anyway, so they were predicting that they lost, I can't remember how much money it was, but it was a lot of money. It was a significant amount of money that they were saying that they had lost because of the decrease in the cannabis industry in the county. Again, it's more of a predictive correlation, not necessarily a scientific correlation, but the idea is that companies are leaving the area. And, kind of from what I've heard around town is that they're leaving the state. So it's not just a Sonoma County issue, it's a state issue. And I think that, this confusion is created because people are trying to understand all the different rules and regulations, and that's with anything. And so it's being able to manage all that compliance and trying to figure out how to navigate the system, which again, any company, any business has a hard time navigating the system. But when you have this complex regulation where it could be city, state, Fed, well, Fed, we know where they stand, but you can have city and state regulation, county and state regulation, in trying to figure out what applies and what doesn't apply. I mean, again, this is just a common issue with regulations and ordinances and people trying to understand things. I mean, that's one of the major reasons I do my show, is because I try to distill down policy. And I'm not going to do a show on cannabis policy because it doesn't affect a lot of people. But, in general, that's what I'm doing on my show, is I'm taking ordinance and policy and trying to distill it down so people can understand and process and know what to support. Again, whatever side you fall on, I support people supporting and being involved in what they believe in, and that's really what's important to me. So that's why I'm here. So just to cover, again, cannabis was kind of an outlier, but I know people are interested in cannabis. I think it's really interesting watching it unfold. It's been really interesting to watch it unfold, and seeing it from many different perspectives, I think, has been really cool. So in short, we have a housing crisis. That's not crazy information. We need to treat the housing crisis like a disaster, in my opinion. We need to develop strong communities, be nice to our neighbor, be understanding, break the stigmas of affordable housing, and then and then cannabis. What do we do about cannabis? I don't know. I think we're all learning through the process, so I don't really have anything to say about that. It's just we're learning as we go. I mean, a lot of these processes we're learning as we go, but I think that is a really big industry in Sonoma County, which is why I brought it up. And I think we do need to figure out some things and make changes based on what's learned, which I think is the plan. I think, like this state bill that's happening, the plan is to try to address those issues. So just making sure that you advocate for where you stand on these issues and make sure that the policy best reflects your jurisdiction, your area, and what you're looking for. So, again, you are listening to, tonight it was State of Sonoma County with DG the 30-something. I hope you join me again. I will be back not next week, but the following week. As always, if you want to be on my show, I love doing interviews. I haven't done very many, but I like doing interviews. I can do them over the phone. I can do them in person. So if there's an issue that you're specifically passionate about, again, I do not do a heavily partisan show. I try to keep it neutral so that people can gather information and make their own opinion. That's really important to me. So anyway, I will see you soon. Join me in 2 weeks. I promise I'll be more regular again if I don't have meetings that conflict. And I hope you enjoyed.